Hey, Steve Mignoni here, and we're in the process right now of beginning the teardown on this 440 big block Mopar engine. Is going to go into Project REM Charger, our 62 Dodge Dart. Our ultimate bogey is right there. 1962 Max Wedge. What a beautiful, crazy engine that is. And we're going to take this very pedestrian 440 and turn it into a replica of that plus 100 cubic inches. But one thing that's kind of cool is you want to have all kinds of information before you go in. This thing right here is kind of cool. This is Chrysler's engineering report on the new 440 high performance engine in 1967. And basically this is what Chrysler Corporation created to alert the press and anybody else who might want to know what was inside the new 440 Magnum engine. It gave information on camshaft changes from the regular 440 of 1966 to the Magnum of 1967. So things like this are very good to have. I like to say fill your library before you fill your garage. And like this is the same basic thing for the 318 small block. In fact, I found these things way back when I worked at Hot Rod magazine in Los Angeles. It was basically a spring cleaning, and Matt King, who used to be the editor of Carcraft magazine, said, "Hey Steve, they're throwing stuff away down in the basement." So we went down there and there was a big dumpster being filled with obsolete paperwork from Motor Trend's archives, and these things were in the dumpster being ready to throw away. So Matt King and I and Dave Freiberg and a few folks from Hot Rod, Carcraft, all the magazines went in there, went dumpster diving and saved those things from obscurity. Okay, we're going to get started with this engine, and pretty much everything starts with working from the top down. Now this engine came out of, we're told, a demolition derby vehicle. I bought it from Winkle Auto Wrecking in Milford, New Hampshire. It may or may not be truck based. It's not a 413 truck engine, which is a whole different creature. They have different intake manifolds and stuff like that. So this might have come out of a motorhome, but again, its last work on this planet was apparently in a demolition derby Chrysler Newport or something like that. We'll know more as we dig in. We'll find out exactly what it came out of as we get into things like the VIN and other things. But in the meantime, let's just get the ball rolling and pull this intake manifold off. Now this is an Edelbrock aluminum intake manifold. This is not something that would have been factory installed. These engines all came with cast iron intake manifolds, with the only exception being 1969 and a half in early 1970, when the 440 six-pack would have had a aluminum intake manifold. Now that manifold would become cast iron, the six-pack, for 1970 and 71, and yeah, 72, believe it or not. They also made 440 six-packs in 1972, like 12, something like that. But the beauty of the Chrysler big block engine is the fact that the intake manifold is dry. There's no liquid, there's no coolant passages, and basically, unlike certain, Chevy small blocks, I think even the big block Chevy, stuff like that, a lot of those engines have coolant passages running right through the intake manifold. So in those situations, changing a manifold in the car or otherwise can be a pretty messy proposition. But on the big block Chrysler, whether you're talking a 350, and yeah, they made 350 Mopars in 1958 and 59, there were low deck engines, but on those engines, as well as the 413s, the 426 wedges, and the 440s, the intake manifold comes right off, and you can actually change from a single 4-barrel or an iron intake to an aluminum intake in the car without spilling a drop of coolant. So that's kind of a nice thing about these engines. Now this intake here is an Edelbrock. It's a dual plane. And this one here is a Performer RPM 440. When we say dual plane, it refers to the fact that if maybe come on in, we'll see that the intake is split in two levels. There's an upper and a deep lower right there. Essentially, the intake is tuned to provide a charge at lower and higher RPMs, and it basically helps cylinder filling at low speed to preserve torque at a slight expense to high RPM horsepower. But with that said, these dual plane intake manifolds are pretty good for general performance use. If you want to go serious high RPM kind of stuff, a single plane manifold is the one. Now I like this engine so far. It's coming apart real easy, no stripped threads, nothing here is giving me trouble, no broken bolts, which is a nice plus. And generally speaking, up top, these fasteners come apart pretty easily. I've never actually seen a big block Chrysler with intake manifold bolt problems. The only exception to that would be a Max Wedge, and we'll be getting into that ourselves. The trouble with the Max Wedge is that the manifold has a big plenum on top, and what you got to do is access the intake manifold bolts on that plenum through removable cap screws. And believe it or not, those cap screws on the top of the Max Wedge intake manifold are the same things used on 7 1/4 rear axles as filler plugs for the differential. Kind of a weird thing. So that same item was used again for the Max Wedges. But with those, it's easy to cross those threads up because you're working blind, but not here. Okay, the intake manifold is unbolted, 4 and 4, that's 8. And look at this, it's kind of stuck down a little bit. It's, you have to get the rubber mallet out here. Oh, almost there, hang on. Now this manifold, it's a good piece, but we're not going to use it again because it's not a Max Wedge item. All right. Okay, I do like this aluminum. How nice is that? It's very light, but again, there's that dual plane function going on inside there. And again, what that does, it feeds low RPM flow and also higher RPM. The only downside is that you don't get the full benefit of the carburetor at all speeds as you would with a single plane where each of the runners goes right down into its designated cylinder port. Anyway, okay, so off with the intake. It's a good piece, but this will go to the swap meet. In fact, proprietor Gary over at Winkle Auto Wrecking does want that back, so we'll certainly give it back to him. Don't put that in recycling. Those are actually worth, yeah, 100, 200 bucks at the swap meet. But we'll give it back to Gary LaPlante at Winkle's soon. Okay, now one thing about the Mopar Big Block is that they do have this tin cover over the lifter valley. And these things are secured with 6 bolts. The exception, of course, is the Max Wedge. Once again, the Max Wedge does not have a tin cover because the manifold itself, this large one-piece cross-ram casting, does the job of covering the lifter galley. But again, on these things, you've got the tin. Now, the beauty of this tin is that it keeps hot engine oil from the lifter galley from spraying up against the bottom of the intake manifold. And what that does, it allows the intake manifold to run a little cooler, and that allows the fuel air charge to be a little denser. Again, cold air, whether it's coming from a Ram Air GTO hood scoop or a Ram Charger hood on a Roadrunner or Charger, cold air is denser and has more potential for horsepower. And the same thing, by keeping the bottom of the intake manifold cool and away from the hot oil, this tin tray contributes power. Now, this is not something found in high-performance 383s and 440s. It's found on all of them. It's just a trait of the Big Block Chrysler. Kind of a cool thing. And they're pretty reliable. Some people reuse them, but most gasket kits and rebuild kits for Big Block Mopars come with a fresh pan. And keep in mind, the 440, 413, 426 Wedge family is a taller deck and a wider span between the cylinder heads. So this tin tray is not interchangeable between the 350, 361, 383, and 400. They're narrower. Okay, off with this. Now, we're not going to worry about sand and crap going inside. There's a little bit of debris on this right here. It's usually not good to let that stuff go in the motor, but this engine's coming completely apart, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, the ends are held down with these 2 metal rails, which are kind of nice. They help to keep things tidy and happy. And then up and off with this. And there it is right there. There's the bottom side of the tray, the top side, and it's nice to see that it's it's well sealed. Often when you see rust on this, you've got a blown head gasket because that pressurizes coolant into the lifter galley, but not here. It's a good sign. Not that it matters in our case because this motor's coming apart, but if you're ever dealing with a Big Block Chrysler, this is rusty, you probably have a blown head gasket. And they can run like that too, by the way. Not well, but they can run. Okay, now we look inside of the galley, or the lifter galley, I should say, and pretty typical stuff. There's the push rods. We'll get to these in a couple of seconds. There's the cam. The lifter's riding on the heels of the cam. This is a hydraulic cam. Certainly it's factory stuff. The only solid lifters in the world of the Big Block Mopar came on Chrysler letter cars of 1959, 60, 61, 2, 63, 64. There was a solid cam in those things. And of course, also on the Max Wedges, 62, 3, and 4. The rest of the Big Block Mopars, including 6-packs and Magnums, had hydraulic lifters, which is cool. No need to mess with lifter rocker arm lash adjustment. So let us now, speaking of rocker arms, expose them by removing the valve covers. Now these valve covers These have 6 bolts around each corner, and that tells us these heads are 1964 through 78. In 59 through 63, big block Mopars had 4 bolts on the valve covers. And we'll get over here on this one here. We'll take them up at the same time. So again, these are 64 up type 6 bolt valve covers. And again, it's kind of a problem. If you're building a Max Wedge car, you can't use 6 bolt valve covers unless you have a 64 model. And so good news though is that Auto Metal Direct does make brand new reproduction correct look 4 bolt big block valve covers. They also do 6 bolt valve covers. Okay, drum roll please. Let's take this valve cover off. This is a generic Cal custom item, nothing special, but let's take a peek and yeah, there they are. Okay, now these are the classic stamped steel one-piece rocker arms found on all big block Mopars. The only exception, again, being those Chrysler 300 letter cars from 59, 60, 61, 62, and 63, and 64 with the solid cam. And of course, Max Wedge cars, which would have all of them would have a forged rocker arm with an adjuster nut, etc. But these are the stamped steel rockers. You find these on 6-pack cars, 383 2-barrels, family cars, all of it. These are great. These are stable up to about 6,500 RPM with the right valve spring, so no problem there. Okay, let's look at this side. Yeah, nice. And again, we look at that. How sweet is that? Nice inside of there. So again, when you see any kind of rust or crap inside of these things, you know 2 things. Poor maintenance and no oil changes, you know, a lot of sludge and crap, or rust tells you blown head gasket. But this is a pretty healthy looking engine so far. Now, when Gary LaPlante, the proprietor of Winkle Auto Wrecking, told me this was used in a demolition derby car for its final go, I often say to myself, well, you know, the guy driving that thing probably held the gas pedal to the floor until it blew up. That's what you do. The demolition derby is the car's final trip, you know? So he said, no, it ran. Okay, so far so good. Okay, let us now pull the ignition distributor out of position. And now this is, of course, the electronic distributor. And here's the hole down right here. It's not screwed down, so let's pull it up and out. Yeah, okay. No points, of course, 1971 up, no points. Instead, this has an electronic reluctor and a magnetic pickup type deal. And the beauty here is that there's no points, there's no point gap, nothing like that to go bad. These are very, very nice. And we might even reuse this thing after a quick clean and rebuild. Okay, well that wraps up this video. We're gonna keep going. We're gonna pull the heads off, take the valve tray. We're gonna actually inspect the push rods, see if they're reusable. There's a trick to do that. We're gonna keep going. That's coming up in the next video. If you like what you've seen so far, be sure to go to our archive, our library, and see all the videos that led us to this point. I think there are 9 videos on this car so far, so check them out. If you see Project Rem Charger, it has to do with this. And in the meantime, of course, subscribe to the Steve Maggs YouTube channel.